Okay. So as we get to the book of Genesis, we find that it tells us about the creation, and it tells us about God's plan for the patriarchs, for mankind specifically. God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden after the creation. He sent them there to keep the garden, take care of it. And of course, sin entered the world through the temptation that Satan brought upon Adam and Eve. And they sinned, and as a result of that, they were cast out of the garden. And so following that, we find man in general, not specifically in regard to certain people, but in certain men, but in general, men became subject to sin all the day long. And we come to Genesis chapter 6, and God saw that the intention of man's heart was only what?
Evil.
Evil, and not only evil, but evil continually. And as a result of that, he brought the flood, cleansed the earth, if you will, and Noah and his family were saved. And as they came off the earth, God asked them, or told them, commanded them. God doesn't ask, he commands. Commanded them to do what? Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So as we often do, we're going to help God with that, but we've got our own agenda, and so they decided to kind of huddle together after a period of years and build this tower up into the heavens and make a name for themselves. And so God did what?
Confuse the language.
Confuse their language, and so they had to disperse, find others that were like-lingual, if you will, had the same language, and so they spread throughout the earth, and we learn about the sons of Japheth and the sons of Seth and the sons of Ham, and how that they were dispersed abroad. And after a period of time, it becomes clear that God chooses certain men to be the heads of families, to be the patriarchs. And so we find today, when we study through Isaac and Jacob and Esau, that they are essentially children of what descendant of Noah? Shem. Okay. So as we study down through this point in time, we're learning how that God is blessing those fathers, and he blesses Isaac just as he blessed Abraham, who was very faithful. He promised him the land in which he dwelt. He promised him a great nation. He promised him that through his seed all nations of the earth would be blessed. And we refer to that as the promise that Christ came through, obviously. And so when we get to today's lesson about Jacob and Esau, things kind of take a turn from that norm, if you will, because up until this point in time, for the most part, what child had received the blessing?
The eldest.
The eldest, okay. All right. We do see that deviate somewhat in connection with Noah's family as well, but there were certain reasons for that, specifically in regard to Ham and how that he cursed Canaan as a result of Ham's mockery for his father and that type of thing. But nonetheless, we come down to today's lessons where we continue to learn about Isaac. And in connection with Isaac, do we see, and granted, Genesis doesn't cover Isaac's life as it did Abraham's. Abraham's life was covered a little more in detail. And I think the reason for that becomes obvious when we get to Hebrews chapter 11. We read about the faith of Abraham and see how that God tested him, and yet he remained stalwart and faithful. When we get to Isaac's life is recorded more in connection with his sons. And it's important that we see that, because what happens with his sons is important. God used that opportunity to bring forth the 12 tribes of Israel, if you will, through Jacob. And so, while we will talk about Jacob and Esau, we want to kind of finish out some important information about Isaac today. So in the beginning of chapter 26, what do we find? What's happening on the earth or in that area where Isaac is living? Famine, yeah. And a famine means what? No rain, no crops yielding fruit for the most part. A dearth, if you will. Sometimes we refer to it as a dearth. Some of your translations may say that. But famine is a word that's familiar to us because we know that there was a famine during the days of Abraham, right?
Yeah.
And so Abraham made opportunity to keep his household fed and his flocks watered and fed and all of that. Now, Abraham had a large household when he went down into Egypt. But there was one thing that God made sure that Isaac understood, and he told Isaac not to do what?
Not to marry. Oh, Isaac.
Isaac.
Yeah, he wasn't to marry anybody outside.
Okay, yeah, but I'm talking about in regard to famine. Billy?
Oh, not really.
He told him not to go to Egypt.
Okay, all right, don't go down to Egypt. And there was probably a good reason for that, as Abraham had gone down to Egypt, and that did not fare well for him from the standpoint of dealing with Pharaoh. I mean, he came out a very rich man as a result. But knowing Abraham as we do through faith, I would think that Abraham would probably look upon that situation and say, you know, I really didn't enjoy my time in Egypt because actually I deceived the man. And so Isaac is told not to go down to Egypt. Famine caused a move for them. He settled in Gerar for a time where Abimelech reigned. Now, Abimelech was what? King. He was king of Philistia at this particular time, or a king of the Philistines. We learn about Abimelech during Abraham's time. What does Abimelech mean? I'm sorry. King or ruler. Okay. All right. So that was kind of a title like Pharaoh. You know, Pharaoh was not the name of the man. Pharaoh was a title. And I'm convinced that when we see his leader of his army, his commander of his army by the name of Phicol, I'm convinced that that's a title as well, because we see that this same man is referred to, this commander of this Abimelech's army is referred to as Phicol as well. That may not be the case. And so don't let me influence your decision about that. If we went back and did the chronology, you know, we might think, well, Phicol maybe was a young man during the first Abimelech's reign, and now maybe he's an older man. I don't know. That may be possible. The Bible doesn't tell us. But for whatever reason, we learn about that as we study this morning. So the Lord said, don't go down to Egypt. And so Isaac went over then to Philistia. He sojourned there. What does that mean? Sojourn.
To live as a pilgrim.
Okay, all right. So that would, I don't know if we could say that's equivalent to a nomadic lifestyle. It may be. I mean, really what they're doing is they're fleeing the famine. They're going over there to Philistia. And granted, a famine could be localized to the Negev. That's where they lived, right? The Negev was the south of the land of Canaan, and it's very arid country, and so it might very well have been that there was not enough rain in that area of the land, so that famine came. But we also find that Isaac stayed over in Philistia for a good period of time, because the Bible tells us, in connection with what Abimelech saw between Isaac and Rebekah, that he had been there a long time. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But when he goes over into Philistia, God established the oath he originated with Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12, when he says, I will give you a great land, I'll make of you a great nation, and through your seed all nations of the earth will be blessed. John, do you have something you want to say? Okay. All right, so it's important that we recognize that these promises, these three promises, are again reiterated to Isaac. We don't see this just once. God doesn't tell him just one time. He tells him throughout his history, just as he did Abraham. You know, Abraham lived until 100 years old before he finally had a child that God said, this is your seed, this is your firstborn, as far as I'm concerned. This is the one through whom you will receive all of these blessings. And he did Isaac the same way. You remember Rebekah was barren, right? He married Rebekah when he was how old? 40. At the age of 60, they still had not had children. And so God had already promised him that he would make of him a great nation. Well, how's that going to happen? He prayed to God, and we have to give Isaac credit for that. He and Rebekah didn't create some kind of scenario like Sarah and Abraham did with the Hagar, the giving of Hagar and all that. But he prayed to God, and God answered his prayer, and Rebekah conceived, and she had these twins that we talked about on Wednesday evening, Jacob and Esau. What does Jacob's name mean again?
Supplanter.
Supplanter. And what does Esau's name refer to? Changed to Edom.
Yeah, but
Bread,
that was for
right?
different reason.
Okay. All right. All right. So as he goes over into Philistia, he still makes the same mistake that Abraham did. What was that?
Lies.
Okay. What kind of lie does he tell? Yeah, she's my sister. Rebecca's my sister. Now, kudos to God for Sarah and Rebecca, because he provided wives for Abraham or Abram and Isaac that were very pleasing to Abram and Isaac. Not only were they wives subject to, or fit, I should say fit for them, and a blessing to them in a lot of ways, they were very beautiful. And so as a result of that, and that would have pleased these men, no doubt. And so as a result of that, they felt like they had to lie about that relationship. But let's think that through for just a minute. And I think Abimelech does think that through. Isaac does not, but Abimelech does. And so he says to Rebekah, he says, you know, when we go into a place, I want you to tell everybody that you're my sister. And this was I really shouldn't say this. I almost said this is a greater lie than what Abraham told, because Abram was half-brother to Sarah, but Rebekah was cousin to Isaac. And so he couldn't really say in any stretch of the imagination that this woman was his sister. But that's what they told. And after a period of time, Isaac was fearful he would be killed because someone would want to kill him and take his wife. After a period of time, Abimelech looks out his window and he sees Isaac caressing Rebekah. Yes, ma'am.
Why did he tell him that she was his sister? Was he afraid they'd beat him up?
He was afraid that he would be killed and then Rebekah would be taken for someone else's wife. Same thing with Abraham. You know, Abraham told Abimelech of his day, I forget the chapter right away, but he told Abimelech of his day that, I felt like the fear of God was not in this place. In other words, if I brought this woman in and claimed her as my wife, then I was afraid that someone would kill me and take her for their own. And that's the same thing that Isaac said. He was fearful that someone of the land would take her after killing him. But, and this is the way we think as humans, but rationally and spiritually, it would have been better for them to have killed him and taken her than for him to have lied about it and taken her. Yes, Al?
Isn't it interesting that the men of
It does.
In other words, their culture doesn't allow that, it looks like.
Yeah.
And they're being deceived.
That's right. They're the one being deceived. And so Abimelech does approach Isaac and he says, "What have you done? Surely she is your wife. What do you mean coming in here and lying to us about that? What if one of my men had taken her to wife? Then you would have brought calamity upon this whole nation." Don't you think that this Abimelech had heard the previous story? And certainly Isaac knew something of that, or he wouldn't have devised the same plan. But here Abimelech, as Al stated, was a very honorable man from the standpoint he recognized this is not something to be done. And what you have done, Isaac, is you have initiated in the thoughts of the men of my nation that she's free. And she was not. And so the king wanted to know why Isaac lied. And as I stated, he told Isaac that one of his people could have taken her and brought guilt upon them all. Abimelech charged his people to stay away from her upon penalty of death. And so that is a king, as you've stated, that is a king that's looking out for his people. Even though he does not claim to be a follower of Jehovah God, he recognizes the authority. And he understands how that he's heard of this man by the name of Abraham who was incredibly wealthy and how he had been blessed by God, by Jehovah. And he sees Isaac as well. As a matter of fact, Isaac, as we'll see in just a moment, was very rich himself. Of course, he had inherited much, or really all of Abraham's wealth, except for the gifts that he had given to his son Ishmael's 12 sons, and Keturah's 6 sons, and had sent them away. And the Bible's not specific about what he did or what he didn't do for Ishmael. We know when he sent Ishmael and Hagar away that they really didn't have anything, didn't have so much as a donkey, so far as we know. But Keturah and her sons were blessed and sent off to the east. But nonetheless, Abimelech charged his people to stay away from Rebekah upon the penalty of death. So let's talk a little bit more about Isaac's prosperity now. Isaac planted, and he reaped 100-fold. He is still in the land of Gerar. He has some place there where he's living. We don't know specifically. And he becomes great. He becomes, the Bible tells us, rich and richer and very wealthy. Now, what the differences are between those terms in those days, we really don't know, except for the fact that God is trying to get us to understand that he increased the status of Isaac so far as material wealth is concerned. And so as a result of that, he, like Abraham, would have had a large household, right? He would have needed the increase that God gave him. He would have needed the blessings that God sent to him as a result of the fact that he had to provide for all of these of his household. And so much like Abraham and the way his life ended up. But we see the difference here between Abraham and Isaac and, say for example, those of Philistia, is that they did want to please and follow after the Lord God Almighty. And he was rich to the point that the Philistines envied him. And part of that envy led to them trying to sabotage really his life and his ability to provide for his family and his flocks, his herds. And we find that the Bible tells us before really these disputes occur between those of Philistia and Isaac's family, that after Abraham had left that country, the Philistines had done something to the wells. What had they done? They filled them in, hadn't they? Filled them in with dirt. And so, again, Abraham is living in the southern country, near the Philistines, but out in the Negev. And he is prospering, and so he digs these wells and he moves away. Eventually goes back to Hebron, the Oaks of Mamre. And he leaves these wells. And so why would the Philistines want to plug the wells? What would be the purpose of that? Bill?
Keep Isaac from water his flock.
Yeah. And that's what happens for Isaac. But I mean, in general, this is even before Isaac, comes down and lives in that specific area because of the famine. The Philistines really don't want anybody moving in on them, much less these mighty men that are sojourning in the land. And so they plug these wells so that they can kind of keep their little nation, their little family together, and I say little from the standpoint of, the size of the land, and can keep other people from moving in. It's kind of like the Tower of Babel idea. We're going to make ourselves a great nation. We're going to huddle in this little place right here, and we're just going to preserve our life, our way of life, and our system. So along comes Isaac, and he has his servants dig out the wells again. And this is what caused the disputes that we'll talk about now. And so as I mentioned, the Philistines have filled in Abraham's wells. Abimelech actually asked Isaac to leave because he feared him. He'd become great. And this is much the same thing that happened in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 9 when Pharaoh, the new Pharaoh that did not know Joseph, rose up and found that there was a great people in his land that he feared because they were going to be mightier than the Egyptians. So the very same idea, here we've got a ruler that's trying to protect his people, trying to protect his land. He don't want anything to happen to that, and so he's fearful and he sends them out. Well, Isaac's not the warfare type of guy. And so he takes his family and he moves. And so Isaac moves out into the valley of Gerar. And I don't know how far that is away from where Abimelech and his family live. But they live out in that valley. And he, excuse my English here, he redug the wells, if that's a proper term. Redug the wells of his father, went on to the valley and dug a very good well there. Brought forth a lot of water. And water was money in that area of the country. It was prosperity. If you had a good well, you could raise a great family, you could water great herds, you could become prosperous. Year after year after year, your herds would double and quadruple and even more. And you could have those fields, if you irrigated them, you could have those fields that brought forth 100-fold. And so it was with Isaac and his family. So the herdsmen of Gerar came and they quarreled over the rights to that well. Oh, this well's in our country. This is in our valley. You can't take this well. This well belongs to us. My father Abraham dug this well. It was his. Now my servants have dug it again. And we lay claim to that. But they would not have it. So this occurs twice. And finally, they dug a well and named it Rehoboth, which means room. God has given us room in this country. Let me go back to the text here before we get too far away from this. And look at chapter 26 and verse 20, where it states there, the herdsman of Gerar quarreled with the herdsman of Isaac, saying, the water is ours. So he named the well Esek, because they contended with him. That Esek means contention. And they dug another well and they quarreled over it too, so he named it Sitnah. Sitnah means enmity. So first there's contention and then there's enmity. And so Isaac moves again and he moves further away and they dig the well and they call that place Rehoboth, and the well Rehoboth, which means room that God had granted them. And they stayed there for a period of time. Now, from there they journeyed to Beersheba. Now let me ask you this. Why would Isaac and his family and all of his herds and all of his flocks move after they had dug that well and finally had received peace and room from the people of Philistia? Hey, have any idea, Justin?
You can look at it as just a way to avoid war and harm coming to his family. Also, the other side of it is, if he was raised by Abraham at all, he should know that to just have faith and go on with his life, if it was in God will provide, as he has done, to make him prosperous in his life.
Okay. All right. There's some good points. Dusty talks about, just giving himself some more space to get away from Abimelech and his people, and then being faithful, to the Lord and trying to follow his path. Al, what else?
He's also moving back into the original area where Abraham is.
Yes, he is moving over in to that area. And there was another thought that came to my mind. I mean, we think of flocks and herds in our area where, we receive maybe 5 feet, average 5 foot of rain a year. It's always green here. There's always something to eat. But it wasn't so in the South. You could stay around an area that had a large well and move out from there, a day or two's journey, and come back and still have that well there. But after a period of time, your cattle begins to diminish the grazing area. And so with a large, and what's the Bible say? He was richer, and then very wealthy. So he had a huge flock and herd. And so they would really eat the grass up, and so they would have to move around to do that, to be able to continue to prosper in that regard. And so I think all of those things are right that we've said. But one of the specific things that I thought of was that. John, you have something you want to say?
I was going to say that my thought would be that God told him to go to the land which he told him and dwell in it, and he would bless him with all the 3 blessings: the land promise, the nation promise, the spiritual seed promise of Christ.
Yeah. And that's true. But Philistia was part of that land. So, we have to take that into consideration as well. He didn't go down as far as Egypt. So, but that's a good point. He did stay in that land. And so they went to Beersheba there, where God appeared to Isaac and he blesses him again. And so let's look at verse 23 of chapter 26. Then he, that is Isaac, went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. Now, that's an interesting statement to be made there. And I'm not trying to say that Isaac was not as faithful as Abraham or anything of that nature, But because of the greatness of the faith of Abraham, God is continuing to bless his offspring. So he built an altar there, and he called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. And so as they go from place to place, they've got to have that water, you know. So they dig that well there. And what did we talked about earlier in our study? Every time you see an area or a well spoken of as beer something another, what does that mean? What does the B-E-E-R mean? Well, right? It means well. So this is the well of Shibna, or the well of Sheba. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. And so in the text we find that Abimelech makes a visit. After he had run him out of his country, Abimelech wants a treaty. Abimelech, Ahuzzath, his friend, and Phicol, his captain, came to see Isaac. So this is a common thing with the leaders of the Philistines at this particular time. They come out and they meet with the mighty leaders of the people. And this is signification here that Isaac was a great man in this country at this point in time, just as his father Abraham was. Yes, George?
I just wanted to bring out that, like Abraham, Isaac was a peaceful man. But, when those two wells were contended over, he didn't say nothing. He got out.
Right.
Because he sought peace, just like Abraham did.
Right. That's right. And, we remember during the battle between Abraham and the kings, the 5 kings, that Abraham had trained men in his household that fought. The scriptures doesn't really tell us anything, do not tell us anything about Isaac and if he had trained men or not. He could have, very well could have, because being having such great flocks that they're going to be marauding people out there that are going to try to nickel and dime you to death. In other words, steal 50 and 100 sheep here or there. You're going to have men to protect them. So I'm sure that he did have some of that. But as George stated, he was not generally a man of war. He was a man of peace. And that is noticeable in this particular story. Yet Isaac did not have an initial favorable response, did he? He said, you kicked me out of your land, you've run us off, you've contended for our wells. What do you want? What do you want with me? I've been a peaceful man up to this point in time. What do you want with me? And so Abimelech says, please make an oath with us, because God has blessed you. So Abimelech has been brought to the realization now that Jehovah has blessed Isaac and his family. No doubt there was some type of understanding that Abimelech had with the fact that Abraham was a mighty man. People would talk about men of wealth like that. They would have made an impression. Even though they had been prosperous years before, they would have left an impression. We still talk about the Vanderbilts today. We still talk about the Rockefellers today. Mighty leaders in this country in finance, transportation, and all of those things. And so Abraham would have been the same way. Isaac would have been the same way, especially while he was still living and active in the leading of his family. And so he says, make an oath with us, because God has blessed you. And so Isaac made a feast. They agreed to make an oath together. And after they left, the servants came and they tell Isaac, we found water, and they called the place Beersheba. Now that, as we, read through that, from our experience in our lifetime, we might think, well, what's such a big deal? But as I mentioned earlier, water was important. Water was essential. It's essential for us even today. If you went home today, after we met at services, you went home and you turned on the tap and nothing came out, what would your initial reaction be? Well, you might think, oh, they must be working on the water line. There must be a main broke somewhere. What if you found out that there was no more water? What would you think then? Oh, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. I wish I'd have saved some water back. Everybody would be going to Walmart, and the store would be empty. There wouldn't be any water. We'd be looking for water everywhere. People would be going crazy. Looting would occur. All those crazy things. So water's essential, but it was very, very important for Isaac and all the people that lived in this land at this particular time. And so that was a blessing that came after this oath was made to Abimelech, that they had found water and now they could be sustained in that place called Beersheba. We talked, I think on Wednesday, maybe even last Sunday morning, about the fact that the writer, Moses in particular, the writer puts in these bits and pieces of information after the main story. We come to a portion of chapter 26 where he does that again. And this has to do with Esau. Esau takes wives. He took 2 wives of the Hittites, people of the land. The Hittites were considered part of the Canaanite nation. And so he took these 2 wives, knowing full well that that was not what his family did. And why was that?
Later on, all of those Hittites, Jebusites, and other ites would be destroyed because they were wicked and they lived in the land of Canaan, and later on, Israel would be in that land and have to destroy all of those.
Okay, all right. That's true about future occurrences. What about present day as far as Isaac is concerned? And Rebekah and Esau and Jacob.
They were wicked.
Okay. They were wicked people. They were foreigners. And that's not the ones from whom they were to take their wives. And there was a purpose for that, because they didn't want to be assimilated. God did not want his chosen patriarchs to be assimilated into the Canaanite nations, and that's what would have happened. I mean, Esau became a mighty nation through the Edomites, but they were not God-fearing people. They were not followers of Jehovah, and so eventually, as John has pointed out, they were taken away. And so they were a grief of mind, or as the New American Standard Translation puts it, in verse 35 of chapter 26, they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And I'm certain that part of that grief was maybe the way they lived, the way they conducted themselves, and the influence they had upon their son Esau. So those things were important to recognize. Okay, any comments or questions about chapter 26 before we move on? All right. Finally now, we come to the point of the main story, I think, of Esau and Jacob. And so Esau is summoned by his father, Isaac. He says, come, I am old now. Isaac is no longer able to, go in and out with the herds and with his servants and do those types of things, oversee the process as he had been before. And so he calls Esau to him and says, now I'm old. I'm pretty much blind. Don't know what's going on much of the time, but I want to bless you before I die. And so he sends Esau out to do what?
To give him some of his favorite venison.
All right, go out and kill some of that venison and make me that savory dish that you make. Now, this is important to the understanding of the story, I think. How did Esau come to know how to make that savory dish? Who do you think told him? I don't know if it was Jacob that taught him.
Rebecca.
Yeah, Rebecca. So Rebecca overheard the plan, and she made a plan herself. She calls Jacob to her and says, Jacob, go out and get me 2 young kid goats and bring them in, and I'm going to prepare this dish for your father, and you're going to get the blessing. And so he brought the 2 young goats. They skinned them, prepared them. She cooked them just like Esau would have. Because we're going to notice later in the story that Isaac doesn't have an issue with food. It's the voice that he has an issue with. Okay? And so Isaac takes that to his father and deceives him. And obviously Esau was later very angry with his brother who had supplanted him. But now let's go back and talk about some of the details. Jacob says about this plan, peradventure, my father will feel of me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver, and then he'll curse me rather than bless me. What are we going to do then? And Rebecca says, you let me worry about that. I'll take care of it. And so basically she says, go and do as I have said. And so when he came back in, she brought out Esau's clothes. It smelled like Esau. She brought some of the skin that the goat had, and she wrapped his back of his neck, the nape of his neck, and then his hands, knowing that Esau would want to feel of his son because he couldn't see him. He wanted to feel of his son to know that it was indeed Esau. And so Rebekah prepared the meal. She brought Esau's clothes, as I said, and Jacob went in before his father Isaac and presented the lie. Isaac just feels like something's not right. And so he checked twice. He said, come near me. And so Jacob came near. And he grabbed him by the back of his neck, and he felt the hair as if it was Esau's hair, because Esau was a very hairy man. And then he smelled the smell of Esau on the clothes. Well, what did he say about that? Yeah, he says, it's Jacob's voice, but it's Esau's body. So he says, bring me the dish and I'll bless you. So he brought him the dish and he ate it, never complaining or commenting about, oh, this is a little different from what you normally bring. Granted, goats and deer or venison, not much different as far as texture and taste is concerned. But he was able to deceive him. And so let's talk about those lies for just a second. Now, we're not going to say that Rebecca was guiltless, but I'm not going to spend time talking about her deception in this. But here Jacob lies. And one of the lies he said was, I am Esau, thy firstborn. So clearly deception, clearly trying to lead his father down to the path of a conclusion to give him the blessing. And then he says, I have done according to what you have asked me. First of all Jacob did was go to the pasture and get 2 goats. That's not at all what Isaac had asked Esau to do. And Rebekah had prepared the meal. And she had also prepared Jacob, mentally and physically. And so he said, eat of my venison. 2 lies. It wasn't his, and it wasn't venison. And then, after being asked, how did you come back? How did you do this so fast, Esau? Jacob says, God gave me good speed. Now, you know, it's one thing. It's one thing for us to put ourselves in a spot where we're lying. It's another thing for not much different to for him to obey his mother Rebekah because she's lying too, but then to drag God into it. He says, Jehovah gave me good speed. And if someone was telling this story and they used maybe your name instead of Jehovah's name, you gave so-and-so good speed, and you're sitting over there in the hearing of that, what's the reaction going to be? You're going to say, what? Are you kidding me? I can only imagine what God felt about that. But we're going to talk about God's role in this a little bit more here in just a second. Are you my very son, Esau? I am. So, look at the escalation, and I think of this from the standpoint of the first sin. Look at the escalation from where Satan told, through the serpent, Satan told Eve, this is going to be good for food. It's beautiful to look upon, and it'll make you wise. And look at the escalation now to Jacob years later, where he's telling all kinds of lies just to get what he wants. And so Isaac blesses him and says, you'll receive the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth will be yours, there will be plenty of grain and new wine for you and your descendants. Peoples will serve you. Nations will bow down to you. Now, just as a side note here, when we think about nations bowing down, what does that remind you of?
That reminds you of the dream that Joseph had.
Okay, all right, that's right. And his brothers coming and bowing down, and his father bowing down before him. And so it seems to me that maybe through the Holy Spirit, Moses is planting a little seed, or God is planting a little seed, if you will, to get us to think about things down the road here. And this would come to pass. You'll be Lord over your brethren. Your mother's sons will bow down to thee. There's again that same indication. Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be everyone that blesseth thee. And then after that's over, Jacob has scarcely gone out the door, and Esau arrives. And boy, it's going to hit the fan. Esau arrives, and he's prepared this food, and he asks his father to arise and eat, and his father said, who are you? Wow. I'm just the man you told to go out and get the food and bring it in, and here I am. I am thy son, thy firstborn Esau. So Esau cries bitterly at the news that Jacob had beaten him to the blessing, so to speak. He said, hast thou not just one blessing for me? Can you not just give me one blessing? And it's kind of like Balaam and Balak here. Jacob has nothing left to give him. Isaac has nothing left to give him. And so he says, Esau, you're going to live away from the fat of the land with the dew of the heaven, and you'll live by the sword. Now, translations like the King James Version, the New King James Version, maybe even the English Standard, I'm not sure, but from that manuscript, it indicates that he would live with the fat of the land. That's actually not as correct a translation as some of the others from different manuscripts, because he's saying here, Esau, I don't have anything left for you. I don't have any blessings for you to give you. And so you're going not to enjoy these same blessings that I just gave to your brother. And so Esau became very angry about that and vowed to kill Jacob, and thought in his mind that Jacob would be around shortly after his father died, and he's thinking maybe this is going to happen soon, and so I'll take my revenge then, I'll just kill him. And so word got back to Rebekah, and she sent Jacob away to her brother's house for safety, telling Isaac that Jacob needed to choose a wife from her family. If he chooses a wife from these Canaanites, what good will my life be to me? So there's another really a hook and crook. But let's look at the big picture of this. I can't stand before you and say this was God's will because sin was done. But what I can say is this, is that God used this instance, this circumstance, this series of events to continue his plan of redemption for mankind. And so when this blessing came, and these blessings were received, it was through Jacob's seed and not Esau's that the blessings were fulfilled. Back when, in chapter 25 it was, when Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, what did the scripture say that Esau did concerning his birthright?
He hated it.
Okay, hated it or profaned it, despised it. We looked at Hebrews in connection with what was done or what was said about Esau. And so we understand that this has occurred, but God has then used this situation to fulfill the promises. And I'm not going to stand here and say, I know what God thought, and I know what he said, and I know what he did, because he didn't reveal that to us. But I do know from what the Bible tells us that God used Jacob and his family to fulfill his promises and his blessings to Abraham. And so whatever was done, be it right, wrong, or indifferent, God provided, and he brought forth his blessings just as he said he would. And so that's the important thing. After we talk about all these details about this situation, the important thing is to recognize is that God's will continues to be done. And so after this point in time, Jacob goes over to Padan Aram. Isaac sent him away to Laban's house to get a wife. And it's interesting to me that Rebekah says, just go away for a few days. Your brother will calm down. 20 years later, Jacob comes back and meets his brother Esau. And it might very well have been that it should have been 20 years later, because it was. And we see that there's a different reunion than what Jacob anticipated, but we'll talk about that in another time. Isaac repeated some of the blessings he had bestowed upon Jacob and said, God Almighty bless thee. And he did, greatly. It took a little bit of Jacob's patience to get what he thought he needed and wanted, but at the same time, God greatly blessed him and brought him back to the land of Canaan. So Esau takes another wife. He sees and knows that his father did not approve of Canaanite wives, so he goes and takes a wife from Ishmael's family anyway. We see how that Esau, and we don't know the span of time here, but we see Esau really is trying to stick that knife into Isaac's back, seems like, because he feels like that he was done wrong. Now, let me just point out here that the birthright and the blessing that the father gave were two different things. Okay? Esau had already sold his birthright. So whether or not he thought he had that coming, he did not. But the blessing that he was to receive otherwise was that which Jacob took by deception. But God worked that out according to his will. Esau, as we often do, hurt himself by trying to hurt his parents. Oh, how many of you have been involved in that type of thing? But it's very sad because at the end of time, we look back on our life and we think, boy, that was really dumb. That was really unnecessary. It was really foolish. And I wound up hurting myself more than anything. But that's the way sin is. When we take it into our hearts and we decide that we're going to do this out of revenge or greed or whatever it may be, unforgiveness, failure to forgive someone, then it always winds up hurting us much more than anyone else. And so those are things that we need to consider. We didn't get to chapter 28 today, but Lord willing, on Wednesday evening we will do that, where we read the story, the famous story about Jacob's ladder, which was really not Jacob's ladder, it was God's ladder, but that's how we refer to the story. So go ahead and study that, Lord willing. We'll talk about that on Wednesday evening. Any comments or questions, George?
Yeah, I looked over Hebrews chapter 12, verse 16. It's a description of Esau. This is how it's stated: that there be no immoral or godless person like Esau. Boy, that's really rough. That's what you put it down there.
Yes, yes.
That's the way it looked at.
Yeah, Esau went from being the firstborn to just being a son that was really disappointing. Yes.
I think it's referring to how he hurt himself.
Yes.
Being,
Yes, John.
Do you think Esau done that because of jealousy too?
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. He definitely did it, as the scripture says, to hurt his parents. Yes, Murphy.
Okay, back in, when Rebecca and Isaac or Rebecca and Jacob were talking, Jacob was afraid he would bring a curse upon me. She said, upon me be that curse. What would the curse have been?
If Jacob was found out trying to steal the blessing from his brother, he said, then if I'm found out, then I'll be a deceiver, and I will wind up being cursed by my father for being a deceiver rather than being blessed. That's the curse that he was referring to, and she said, if anything comes about, it'll fall on me rather than you. And so that was her way of encouraging him to do what she said.
In other words, she's saying, I'll take the one.
Yes.
She was pretty clever.
Anything else?